everyone. Today, we are going to learn about domain storytelling from Stefan today on this virtual domain-driven design session. This will be a very exciting one, basically, as he will show domain storytelling for us in practice, which is always great. I'm going to be hosting today and also facilitating, and as well as being a domain expert. So please, sorry if the response time to your questions will be a bit slower, but I try to keep an eye on all your questions and comments, I swear. I'm gonna switch off my video at some point because I have very poor network quality and I don't want to ruin the recording and the live stream. So that's all from my side. I'm Zsófi, for those who don't know me. And basically that's it. I'm working as a product manager. And today I am going to be, as I mentioned, I'm going to be functioning as a domain expert in this experiment today. And I'm passing over to Stefan, who is going to give us a short intro about himself and also about domain storytelling first. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, hello everyone. So I'm Stefan. I'm originally from Austria, where I studied software engineering, and I have been developing business software for the last 15 years in Hamburg, in Germany. And for the last couple of years, my professional focus kind of shifted a little bit away from the technical side of software development, more towards the people side and the requirements side. So I work as a consultant, coach, trainer for things like requirements engineering, collaborative modeling techniques like event stopping and domain storytelling, and in general, all things DDD. So enough about me. What is domain storytelling? It is a workshop format that helps people to have a conversation about their domain. And domain experts like Zsófi today will tell stories that explain how people and or software systems work together. A moderator, that's me, guides the conversation. And that allows us to learn about the people, the activities, the objects that they work with, who the people cooperate with, and why they do what they do. And that knowledge is useful for a number of reasons, but typically domain storytelling is used in software development projects or product development. We want to know what we should build, what software we should build, what to do, how it is going to be used, and how workflows will change after we are finished with implementing the software. There are a couple of particular use cases for domain-driven design, and I will explain them a bit later, I guess, because I think the best way to get familiar with domain storytelling is to do it, or at least to watch Zsófi and me do it. So here is what's going to happen in the next, I don't know, hour or so. We will have a little demo. So thank you again for also playing the role of a domain expert. And then I will briefly explain the method, the concepts behind it. I guess later we can talk about a few specific things, maybe questions from the audience. And I can also show a couple of things. I provided some slides and some demos. Maybe showcase a couple of usages in DDD, like how to find context boundaries. And I guess that's pretty much it, what we will do, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I will also switch my video off now and share my screen with you, because we will be using an online tool for modeling. So, and if everything works fine, you should now see a modeling surface.
I see it, at least.
Yeah, that's great. Because actually that's super important that you can see what I record. So we talked a little bit before what you will explain to me, what the domain is about, and I will model it. We'll ask questions about it. And this is really not about the tool. I will explain later that we can use whiteboards or any kind of graphics software modeling tool for it. So I will also quickly explain later what this tool is that I'm using now. but that's not the focus of today. So, Sophie, what domain do you have prepared for us now?
All right, so I brought a domain today I used to work on a longer time ago, actually. This is about investment banks organizing the biggest annual investment conference, which is a huge one with many thousands of investors and companies. So this is basically the fully public part of it, obviously. So I don't want to mention confidential information from my previous company. So there are more personas in this process, in this workflow, basically, but I just want to start and stick to the main one first, which is the coordinator. It will be our main persona, I think, for today. So these coordinators are the ones who work at investment banks, and basically they are the ones who are organizing or handling the whole organization of this big annual investment conference. Yeah. And there are other personas too, actually, which I would like to mention here, but maybe it's not really interesting from our perspective today. But there are the investors themselves, obviously, who are the main target audience of these huge conferences, and basically the salespeople at the investment banks who basically contact the investors and maintain the relationship with them. So maybe we have time or effort to these other personas as well. But first, if you are okay with that, we can go ahead and deep dive into coordinators live.
Okay,
first.
so before we really start, let me quickly say that you can do this in a one-on-one setting like we are doing now. And I think if you're doing it remotely, this is actually the best way to do it. But it's also a workshop format where you can invite many people. So another case how we could do this is we invite all those people that you talked about, like the salespeople and investors, some of them, and also coordinators, into a room and have a workshop together, looking each other in the eyes. That would also be a way to do it.
Yeah, that's true. So I really enjoyed your workshop actually at Kandinsky. I finally had the chance to participate on that. So it's really so many people, domain expert telling us the domain, and we are capturing it with the fake dev team that time because the workshop. So it's a really great experience to have more people in the same room or online or whatever, wherever.
Yeah, maybe it's also something that we can discuss after the demo a little bit, the differences between doing it online and in real life in a room together.
Yeah.
Okay, but now back to organizing an annual investment conference.
How much do you know about that? About this domain? That's
nothing.
Cool. So it's a bit similar to the normal conference organization, but not that much. So this is very unique actually amongst the conference organization domains. Okay. So coordinator, that's the domain language there. Actually, you know what, I was thinking of it like we already have a common language, which is the English, because neither your nor mine is, the mother tongue is not English, obviously. Yeah. So this is the first step, we talk the same language. Anyway, so coordinator. Yeah. So how it starts, so these big investment banks and these coordinators mainly start to work on planning this biggest annual investment conference around spring each year. So let's say, and once they confirm the dates and the city, because that's the first step, that they confirm the dates and the city and the venue with the city.
Okay, let me stop right there. You said they, so it's not one coordinator working alone. It's a group of people, or
exactly.
Okay, then let me change the icon. So
let me, maybe you want to highlight, because these coordinators are not always work at the same investment bank, because sometimes more investment, because this is a very big annual investment conference, and more investment banks can organize that, the same conference basically, because this is a bigger one. And this basic info is shared amongst these coordinators of the different investment banks.
Okay, maybe we can dive into that a little bit deeper later. For now, I would say give me a coarse-grained overview of what's going on, because really I've no clue.
Okay, so, sure.
You said they agree on a date and on a place?
City and venue. Yeah, we can say place, basically. Or yeah, be more specific, and we can say city and the venue and the date.
And date. So I will use this information icon here. Usually I'll try to capture the information with icon that is most suited, but I guess in this case, it's just this generic icon here. Okay, so they agree on a city, a venue, and a date. And what happens next?
Yes. The basic information, so this city, venue, date, is shared amongst the investment banks who is organizing the conference. So amongst these coordinators. I'm not sure whether you want to indicate this.
Well, now that we subsumize them all as one group of people,
okay.
I guess that's not really necessary there.
Okay, so after they shared these data with each other, which is not relevant for now, so they really aggressively start to work on addressing the corporates they want to come and present at the conference. So because the main thing at a investment conference is that corporates or companies coming to present, for instance, Facebook, Tesla, whoever, the investment banks want to present. And also the target audience, as I mentioned, are investors, quite big investors. And the conference is basically the main goal there is, to have investors for companies. So it's a matchmaking basically. So find the proper investment deals for investors and companies to find the proper investors for their shares or investments.
Okay, so first those coordinators have to find companies that are looking for investors, right?
Yes. And they pretty much have a list each year, like what companies or big corporates they want to target and invite to the conference. So they have a very, let's say, not strict, it's not the right word, but so they have a list prepared about the companies.
So there's a list of companies, right?
Yeah, they prepare it for almost a year, or I don't know. So based on some, methodology and whatever, they put this list together of companies they want to invite to the conference. So basically, they really start to aggressively start addressing these companies.
How do they do that? How do they address these companies?
Basically, they send out invitations to these companies in order to see which ones could make it to the conference. So first they have the list and they invite all those companies on the list.
Okay, you said they send invitations to those companies, yeah?
Yeah, I really like this tool, by the way.
Thanks. So now those companies are invited.
Yes.
What happens next?
And these coordinators are waiting for the corporate companies to reply to these invitations by registering for the conference. So if the company, if a company accepts the invitation, the company does that by registering to the conference on a registration UI. So there is a
so there's also some kind of web page where you can register for the. Is it just a registration web page, or is it a general conference web page?
There is let's say a registration web page, because it's pretty much well separated as far as I remember.
And they have to, I guess, fill out some form of registration. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. And preferences and also you need to fill out, as a company, you need to fill out your availability. So when you can do sessions, how long sessions you can do,
I'll put that in a comment.
Okay.
Availability. You said something about preferences.
Yeah, let's say audience preference. So sometimes companies want specific big investors, these superstar investors, to attend their presentation, for instance. So these preferences. and even food preferences as well. So this registration webpage is collecting every data from companies about companies.
Yeah, so I will leave it for now. If we had an actual meeting, I would ask you at least later to show me such a registration webpage, or I would open it myself to check out what kind of questions you ask and everything about it. But I think for now it's fine for me at least. So now the companies, they have filled out the registration on the webpage, and what happens now?
Yeah, actually, it can be a slower process when all the companies will, feedback whether they will be there or not. So in the meanwhile, the coordinators can basically start to build up the agenda using the incremental information coming in from the companies. So these companies, these presenters will, enter their availability data when they can do presentation and so on and so forth. And the coordinators, based on these information, they are really working on the agenda. Of the sessions.
Incrementally, so yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because it's continuous here at this stage yet. When they are registering, information comes in, they update the agenda.
Okay, I can even make it more explicit. Would that be right if I say with information from the registration?
Yeah, perfect. And also what kind of sessions they are doing, not just when. So this kind of information helps the coordinator to build up the agenda. Yeah, I just wanted to, I'm just thinking of maybe after all introducing another persona here, because here what happens is basically coordinators working on the agenda, and these information they share with their salespeople, because these salespeople at the investment banks, they are the ones who basically maintain the relationship with the investors. So the salespeople need to know about how the agenda is going on, how it's building up, and all this kind of information, because they can now already start to target their investor contact. So basically, they get these information shared from the coordinators. I mean, what kind of companies already registered, when are their sessions, what?
So they share like agenda and registration information. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. That's perfect.
By the way, did you look at the Zoom chat? Is everything okay with our audience? Because I can't see it right now because.
Yeah, actually, I have a question here. I mean, we had a question here. What is the name of the tool you are using? Is it online, free?
It's called Domain Story Modeler, and it's an open source tool built on some open source BPMN software. I will show you the link later.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
And the icons we're using, they are from the Google Material icon set, just in case you're wondering. They're also free to use.
Okay. Oh, Julie already linked it in. Thanks, Julie.
Cool.
Okay. Coordinators are sharing the information. Yeah, sorry.
I was just repeating last sentence. So coordinators, the coordinators share, actually it should be share the agenda and the registration information with the salespeople,
Yeah. And basically the salespeople, based on this information, they invite their investors.
Okay, so do they meet in person or?
Rather through this registration webpage. The invitations are sent out throughout this registration webpage, let's say, or system as well.
Okay, so can I just repeat what we wrote in step 3? That
I think so, yes.
Okay. Let's do that. Okay, so now the investors are invited. What's the next step?
in the meanwhile, these coordinators are constantly keep their salespeople up to date on the presenter lists because it's continuously changing or might change in the meanwhile. So the registered companies and preferences and sessions and agenda, these kind of things are shaping in this stage. So coordinators keep their salespeople up to date continuously on these things. And so salespeople keep investors up to date on this.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so actually they're not just sending invitations, they also
kind of communicating. We had a comment that the text is hard to read while watching on YouTube. So could you please zoom a bit in your... Oh, cool. I hope this is better.
Yeah.
Please, guys, let me know if not. Okay. So, yeah, so they are sharing information. Everyone is registering. Yeah, so this state is going on for a while. And then when there is a final list of the presenting companies, because it's still shaping, when there is a final list with confirmed attendances, the coordinators basically publish the final list to the sales team. For salespeople, sorry.
Yeah, you said there's a final list with confirmed.
I said presenters, but companies, sorry. You can say companies. I'm just saying presenters because the domain language here.
If
we can use companies.
If you're calling them presenters.
So these companies are going to present at the conference. So maybe presenters is a better domain language here.
Yeah.
I mean, not better. It's a more specific one. So we can say it's yeah.
Okay. Those companies, they become presenters when they accept the registration, or is it not mandatory for everyone to present?
That's a good question. Actually, yeah, they become presenters by registering because companies not attending. I mean, these companies not attending these conferences if they are not presenting. Attendees are typically investors. And if these bigger corporates or companies are going there, it's because of presenting and gathering, or they want to have investments in their businesses.
Yeah.
So they are anyways going to present.
Okay, let me save this. Okay, so...
Is there a way to mark the crucial things here, crucial artifacts here with something like color, or like this final list is very prominent or very you know, it's a crucial step here, or it's a pivot event.
If you're doing this on a whiteboard with sticky notes, for example, yes, of course you can use whatever highlighting you want. In this tool, not yet, but the very next version will support different colors. So you could, for example, highlight things that are really important with a different color. So that will be available soon.
Okay, cool. That's cool. Good to know. Okay. So we have the final list now, which is distributed to sales teams. Then coordinators start to work on scheduling, which is a huge and very complex process. So,
excuse me, you said they start scheduling, or?
Yes, is the domain word for that. I mean, they start the scheduling, and maybe it seems like very similar to building up the agenda. And why is it different? But it is very different because scheduling in this case is a very, very complex process, because based on the incoming meeting requests from the investors, because they want, oh, maybe we can capture this. Okay, I don't rush. So they start to work on the scheduling, and I would go to the investor part a bit, because the scheduling is mainly based on, they need to really look at all the incoming information, like really incoming requests from the investors, and they are looking at availability of presenters and slots at the same time and everything. So who wants what and where to attend and whatever. So investors, which I haven't mentioned yet, but investors basically sending in through the registration webpage, or sending in their requests. So which companies they really want to meet with, or presentation. So which company's presentation they really want to attend, or they also can like request a one-on-one meeting, for instance, with the company's CEO or whatever. So this is a like superstar investors can ask for, you know, just sit down and talk to Elon Musk or whoever.
Yeah.
So
cool. So yeah, for example, one-on-one meetings or yeah, okay. I guess that's good enough.
I need to restructure my screen in order to see what you are drawing. Okay. Yeah, so based on all this incoming information, coordinators are working on the scheduling right now.
Okay, then I have to switch the numbers, right? Because the first the investors send the requests via the registration web page. And
yes.
Then you work, the coordinators start working on the scheduling.
Yeah, but also based on the company's preferences and whatever. So I'm not sure how to number that, but yeah, you are right basically. So after the request comes in, and it's iterative obviously, but yeah, so after a request comes in, then can coordinator work with that.
Okay, so then I will switch the numbers. So this one will be 9 and that one is now 10. Okay, cool. So now we work on the scheduling you said based on
a lot of things like incoming meeting requests from the investors,
is it captured?
Availability of the presenters, requests and preference, and you mean
and
requests and preferences. That's perfect.
But you also said availability.
Availability of everyone basically, and
I guess some other factors, right? But as I said, this is just supposed to be an overview. It doesn't have to be complete right now, but I want to get a sense of how things are happening.
I think that's great so far. I'm just thinking whether we want to capture that competitive situation when, for instance, two investors are, you know, requesting for the same meeting or one-on-one with the CEO or whatever, and coordinators need to decide based on tiering or investors, you know, ranking or history, or so whether we want to capture that there can be this competitive situation for meeting the companies or presenters.
There's a competitive situation between the investors, right? Or between the companies?
Between investors, that's true.
Okay, that sounds like there are some rules or policies involved. You said something about tiers. This is you couldn't have chosen a bad example, a better example, because this is actually something that I can pick up later when I explain what's going on. So that's something that we could dig deeper with different collaborative modeling methods, but more on that later.
That's cool.
Yeah,
that's cool.
So let's try to finish this overview and then move on with our session.
Yeah.
So we now have scheduling.
Yeah, they are scheduling. So they obviously at the end of the day, this I mean at the end of the 3 months, because it's almost a 3 months process actually, the whole thing. So when coordinators manage to put the whole schedule together, considering all these things we mentioned so far, they ask their sales teams, so the sales people here, to communicate all the scheduling and everything to their investors. So the sales people need to contact here their investors, their contact investors, and basically tell them whether they got what they wanted or not, or they got scheduled in or not, and why. And
okay, so you said
that's sometimes unpleasant conversations.
Okay, so first the scheduling goes to the salespeople, right?
Yes.
Is it the finalized? Because,
let's say let's just do one with finalized schedule, or the schedule. The schedule.
Yeah, finalized schedule. Okay, and then they talk their investors through it. So is it actually a conversation you have? Should I use this conversation icon?
Between salespeople and
between
coordinators?
salespeople and investors?
Oh, yeah, you can use the conversation icon because sometimes phone, sometimes in person, somehow the conversation needs to happen.
And you said they kind of explain it to them or
Yes, exactly. Because sometimes it's unpleasant conversation because when salespeople need to tell the investor that, hey, you couldn't make it or whatever. But in many cases, it's just like telling them that, hey, you got scheduled this time, whatever. So it's an official, because they are the ones who maintain the relationship with them, and the salespeople's clients are investors. Mm-hmm. So basically, they are communicating with their clients. Sometimes there are negotiations as well. So when investor doesn't want to accept, that they couldn't get scheduled in, and then this ping pong going over, like salespeople can do something for that, and salespeople goes back to the coordinator. I'm not sure if you want to capture that, but that's perfect. So negotiations possible.
Yeah, that's something that, for example, on a follow-up in a follow-up session, we could explore that. So actually, what can change and what power do they have? But for now, I'll just make this annotation here so we have it captured for later, and then we'll, in real life, we would talk about it a little bit later.
Yeah. And basically, I just have one thought at the end. So like now coordinators are distributing or let's say publishing the schedule throughout the registration webpage.
Okay. No, I didn't want to move that one.
I really like this tool.
So they publish the, I think we call it finalized schedule.
Finalized schedule.
If someone discovers spelling mistakes, just keep it to yourself, because it's usually the case when a lot of people watch. I never see the mistakes, and everyone else does.
And yeah.
Okay.
I'm just thinking that the final event here may be that the investors can download their schedule from the registration webpage. So they can download it to their device and also print out if they like. You
said they can download their schedule? Does everyone have an individual one?
Yes, exactly. Good question.
Okay.
I didn't mention.
So they're actually, how would you describe it? There are several schedules, or is it like one schedule and everyone just sees a part of it?
Well, investors can just see, so one investor can just see their own schedule. So only those meetings and corporate presenter companies, they are going to attend. So they are negotiated or they are requested. Own schedule, exactly. So an investor cannot see another investor's schedule and where they are going to and whom they are talking to and these kind of things.
So okay, let me quickly capture that. Cannot see other investors. Schedule. So I guess there's also some sort of login password protection in the registration.
As well as this as well as this competitive situation we talked about. So between investors.
Okay, so there's like a private download area or something like that, or restricted download area.
In the rest, it's actually driven by individual authentication and and these security restrictions in the registration webpage, because it also has other capabilities. So not just registration, but these kind of things. And I don't really remember what other. The requesting capability as well. Okay.
So there's some sort of authorization or authentication required on the web page to access the schedule, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
And as far as I remember, maybe I don't remember correctly, but it doesn't really matter here, I guess. It's pretty much it from the coordinator perspective on a high level. So because we could now talk, I mean, if we would go further, we could talk about registration part of it, client management part of it, which is between salespeople and investors. But I think to give an insight into this, maybe that's okay if we just have this main flow, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually often how we start, because this kind of coarse-grained big picture domain stories, they help to get everyone on the same page. Believe it or not, often it happens that people cannot even agree on something on that high level. So it doesn't make much sense to go into the details when they cannot agree on this big picture kind of level. And this is kind of our map or our guide through this domain, so we can actually have a look on each and every one of those activities, of those numbered steps here, and talk about it in more detail. But maybe before I explain how I would proceed now, let me quickly summarize first the story. And that's actually one of the nice things about this tool, that you cannot do that easily on a whiteboard. So I just started the replay mode, and I will explain your story now back to you. And if you think that we missed something or I wrote something down incorrectly, then please say so.
Okay.
So we have coordinators that agree on a city, a venue, a date, and prepare a list of companies. The coordinators send invitations to companies that are looking for investors, and they fill out a registration on a registration web page. They have to provide some information on availability, on their preferences, and once they're registered, they become presenters. And from that information, the coordinators build an agenda incrementally. So this is actually happening like in parallel. And then the coordinators share the agenda and the registration information continuously with their salespeople, and they send the invitations to their investors. So then at some point, we have a final list with confirmed presenters that is shared with the salespeople. And I think is that the point now where the requests are sent to the registration web page, or is there error in the numbering? It's late, forgive me.
I think that's that's fine. I'm just looking at it.
Yes, you're right, because it's step number 8 here is I'll zoom in a little bit more. Yeah, okay, so yeah, great. Then the next thing would be, okay, for this overview, I'll zoom out a little bit because it's easier then to maneuver around, but I will explain what's going on. So in case it's too small for reading on the stream. So the coordinators work on the scheduling based on the information they have on requests, availability, preferences, and there can be competitive situations between the investors. So this is a point where, for example, some policies come into play, or business rules, however you want to call them. And then at some point, we have a finalized schedule that is distributed to the salespeople, who explain the finalized schedule to the investors. And that can be a difficult conversations. And there's also the possibility of negotiations happening there. So that's also some special case that we might want to look into in the future. Then the finalized schedule is published on the registration webpage, where the investors can download their own schedule, and they cannot see the other investor schedule because, as we said before, there's a competitive situation. So this access here is password protected and requires some authentication.
Exactly. And I really wanted to find something that is not proper here, but everything is so properly captured, I think. So I just wanted to find something for the sake of example, but I couldn't. So I think, I should have thought ahead and just, had a mistake there. But no, actually, this is perfectly captured. And I really like this tool now.
Because you are such a great domain expert.
Ah.
Okay. So
also we had a comment,
yeah.
by the way, like from Julie. So thinking about how long it would normally take to get this info out of people and capture it so succinctly. I cannot say. So
Yeah.
Okay, succinctly. I cannot say this. Okay, so combo of Zsófia's insights, Stefan listening ability, and the tooling, bravo. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So normally I think, yeah, it takes much longer time, I guess. So this is a good example, because this domain actually took me, I mean, not me, but the product team in the Hungarian office, because we just simply didn't have any insight into these things happening all around the world. It took almost a year to assess the whole domain and get these small information bits from everywhere and put this together. Unfortunately, we didn't have domain storytelling technique. I mean, maybe we had, but we didn't have any knowledge of that, or we didn't know about that. So yeah, so normally it takes a lot of time, I think, even if you are using tools, but this helps a lot. So if it takes you even many meetings, I think, when you gather and do these visual modeling things, it's very useful, but it takes time. Yeah. I'm not sure what your experience is, Stefan, with this. So with
yeah,
time.
I'm still trying to figure out where the question was posted. So was the question regarding how long does it take to understand a domain, or was the question how long would it take to draw such a domain story in real life?
Basically, Julie says that thinking about how long it would normally take to get this info out of people and capture it. So yeah, it can be
because
much more.
Doing this this technique in real life doesn't actually take much longer than the conversation we had. I mean, if there are several people involved and you have to get everyone on the same page, then yes, it takes maybe a bit longer. But in my experience, 30 to 60 minutes are enough to cover stories that have, like, I don't know, 15, 20 steps or sentences in them. So it works quite well. So after maybe 1.5 hours, you can do 2, maybe 3 domain stories, have a break, and then continue. That works pretty well in my experience.
Yeah. Actually, we also have another question. How would you capture complex if-then chains with multiple opening storylines?
Okay, I think to answer that question, I should first do a quick explanation of how domain storytelling actually works, and then I will get back to the question. Would that be okay?
Cool. Sure.
Okay, so I think the obvious thing is that we're using a visual notation here, so a pictographic language, to capture what domain experts tell us. And that's happening in parallel, and it's happening in a way that everyone who participates in the story should be able to see the model. So I will zoom in a little bit. So everyone should be able to see that. So we have also a visual feedback channel, and then there's also a oral feedback channel, because I keep talking about what I hear and repeating it. So the visual notation, well, it consists of, well, we have actors. So those are the active people or software systems in our examples, in our domain. And you can use different icons to capture them. So this modular, for example, now has 3 standard icons, but you can also adapt the visual notation if you're using a whiteboard or sticky notes or whatever modeling tool you want. It's good practice to adapt the icon set so it matches to your domain. So if you're dealing with physical things like containers or storage or whatever, then have an icon that represents that domain concept. That's very helpful in expressing what you actually want to cover. So the idea is that the icons kind of represent either the actors or also the work objects. That's how we call them, the things that are passive, the things that are worked with. So list of companies, invitations, schedules, all that stuff. And then you connect those actors and the things that they work with arrows. Those are activities. So we label them accordingly. So we say agree on and prepare and send and publish. And that enables us to visually capture sentences. So usually you have this subject, predicate, object form, like the coordinators agree on a city, venue, and date. You can also express collaboration. So here we have people collaborating on something, people working with things, or here we have a sentence where the coordinators build an agenda with information from another work object from a registration. So that's also possible. Now, to tell stories, we need more than one sentence, and that's where the numbers come in handy, because they express the sequence of activities. And that's actually now a good time to talk about conditionals. So as opposed to other modeling techniques like BPNN, for example, there is no visual representation here for gateways or ifs or switches or case or whatever. So we are looking at one concrete scenario, one concrete flow here, one concrete story. And if we need to narrow it down so it's concrete enough, we will do it with assumptions and annotations. So for example, we often start with the happy path of a business process. So we have a basic idea what it's supposed to look like, what it's supposed to do. And if the happy path requires some conditions like, I don't know, for example, here we could have that there are no changes to the finalized schedule through these negotiations here. So that's our assumption here. So we just left that out and we're dealing with it later. So we try to narrow it down to a specific example. We could even narrow it down to a really, really specific example. Sometimes that makes sense. So then we are talking about a concrete conference. Then I would ask the people, okay, last year you were in, I don't know, in Budapest, and you were in this venue on that date, and which companies did you invite, and so on. And then you narrow it down really, really deeply. Sometimes that makes sense. But I think this this level of granularity also works fine. So the basic idea is that we don't do this for all the possible variations of a business process, only for the most important ones. So one could be the happy path, but sometimes the happy path never really exists. So we do it for the 80% case, or we do it for a specific error case. So maybe something that goes wrong a lot of times, or something that goes wrong and has really bad consequences that we also want to capture. And usually a handful of variations are enough to understand a business process like organizing a conference. Okay, then so that was the working with variations and storylines. Mm-hmm. So if we actually had another variation that we wanted to look at, for example, one where the agenda and the schedule changes all the time, we would draw another story for that. And the interesting thing is that a lot of times people usually have these assumptions, all those things that could go wrong, and in their heads they always talk about all those things that could be, and that is really distracting if someone is putting so much hypotheticals on the table if you haven't really understood the basic process. So once you understand the basic process and the main variations, then you can talk about variations and exceptions to the rules. Then it works, but the other way I think is really difficult.
Yeah.
So that was the visual alphabet and dealing with variations. As said before, for this to work, it's a workshop method. So we invite people from the domain experts, people that really know what you're talking about, people like Sophie, who really knows what she's talking about. And usually we invite not just one person, we invite several persons. ideally, I want to have those people who are actors in the picture also represented and contribute their part of the story. So that's really helping to break up silos and boundaries between the departments. In today's business processes, often there's not one single person that can tell you everything about the whole process. Usually we have our blinders on and don't really know what's happening left or right for us. So this kind of collaborative modeling techniques like domain storytelling, event storming, they really get people to have a wider view of what's going on in their domains. For that to work, you need a tool that visualizes the domain story. So you can have digital tools. I've heard of people telling me that they provided some or made some plugins for themselves or some templates for Draw.io or for Glyphy, and I think someone did something with Plant UML. But we decided to some while ago to do our own modeling tool based on a piece of BPNN software by Camunda, and this one is open source, so it's available on GitHub. I think the link was already posted. I opened it here also. Maybe I can. I prepared a collection of links that I can add to the chat later. So,
it would be great.
Yeah. So just click on releases and there's the latest release, and it runs in your browser, even offline. So it's just a HTML and JavaScript. And you can download the domain stories as text file or JSON and as pictures. So that's really handy actually. But it's really not required to do it. So I've at DDD Europe, I talked to some people who said they actually prefer the whiteboard experience, because one thing that you can do on a whiteboard that is hard to do on a digital tool.
That can be the case actually as well.
Yeah. One thing that is they prefer is you can open it up a bit, because now I was the moderator, I was doing all the modeling, asking all the questions, and you were the interviewee. And if you have a group of people that know the method, you can open it up a bit and actually do shared modeling duties. Then the moderator takes a step back and becomes more of a facilitator and takes care that people really stick to one storyline and don't mix storylines and stuff like that.
Mm.
And I think that's basically it.
Okay, we have more questions actually. So in my opinion, I mean in Darius's opinion, this tool gives a great artifact that could be initiation and base for writing user stories for the features and first scenarios in Gherkin language for BDD process, and also can guide for search for some parallel scenarios. Sorry, not a question, but a great idea actually, or a great use of this technique as well.
Yeah. It is, and actually that's how we do it. So maybe I should talk first a little bit about scope, and then answer that question or add to that idea. So this one here I would consider a big picture, rather coarse-grained, and actually now we could look at every single sentence here and dig deeper into the details. And for example, preparing a list of companies, that could be a small business process on its own. I guess you have to you have some databases, some tools where you find those companies, you have to assess them. I guess there's more complexity in there. So we could do a whole nother domain story about that. And then you can look at all these sentences and ask yourself, well, if our goal is, if we're doing this to build a software system, we can look at what steps do we want to have the system, do we want the system to support, and continue this conversation and move to something like user stories or some other form of requirements conversation. So we can actually talk about what does it mean to prepare a list of companies. So what is a list of companies? And then we can also dive into, for example, example mapping. One of the discovery techniques used in behavior-driven design that can later lead to something like Gherkin scenarios, especially when I come across things like, here it is. So we said here in this sentence number 10 that the coordinators work on scheduling based on requests, availability preferences, and so on. And we said, for sure, there are some policies or rules at play. Can you give me an example? And then we add something either in the same session or at the end of the session, or maybe in a follow-up workshop, and we dig deeper into it. But the domain story gives me the context, and then I know where to dig deeper and have conversations about requirements and everything we need to know to learn to develop software.
Okay. Also, now this time a question. So from Julie, actually, where would you employ storytelling in the scope of also having event storming and event modeling at your toolkit?
Yeah, so I really like a sentence I hear a lot in the especially in the DDD community. That's you need more than one tool in your toolbox or in your modeling toolbox, and that's exactly how I view it. Rarely we come by using one size fits all tool for all our modeling endeavors. So people have mixed domain storytelling with other things like event storming, example mapping, user story mapping. I've even heard who was it? Someone I spoke in Amsterdam with impact mapping.
Oh, okay.
To set the context of the workshop. That's also interesting. I've never tried that in that combination. So I guess if you really look at, for example, event storming, there is certainly an overlap where you can choose either one technique or the other technique, where it doesn't really matter so much. But there are also clear areas where I think one is better suited than the other one. And by chance, actually, this afternoon, I had a 4-hour event storming workshop with my team, and we deliberately chose event storming because we thought it was better suited for the job. So
yeah.
one thing where we combine those, or one way to combine those tools is, for example, if you do a big picture event storming, sometimes you stumble across this parts of the timeline where you're never really sure which view to model. Is it for, let's say you want to buy a ticket somewhere and you have the customer view, you have this event ticket bought, but maybe you also have the company view ticket sold. So there's something where you have several actors, and then you can ask yourself, well, how would that look from a collaborative viewpoint? And then you take out a slice of this timeline and model it as a domain story. And then you have another view on the same part of the domain, but now from a point of view where collaboration in the interaction is the main factor and not a timeline of events.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I answered the question.
I think so. And I also wanted to add that basically I'm using both. So I'm using event storming and I'm also using domain storytelling. And actually what I experience, so for instance, it obviously depends on the goal, on your goal. So if you want to find boundaries, maybe you go for event storming. But where I used specifically domain storytelling is where I wanted to visualize the result for business people later on, because this is really very impressive and expressive and visual, and you can walk a business person through on the whole thing and show them what happens with icons, with pictographic language. I think this is very useful. On the other side, event storming, actually I wouldn't like walk through all the business, how can I say this? So all kind of business persons through that, or I cannot, because maybe this domain storytelling fits that purpose better. But it really depends on your goal with the whole thing.
But you said an important thing there. You said walk through.
Yes.
So I think for both techniques, being part of the workshop is actually the biggest win, and it's different if you have been part of this workshop and you look at this domain story, for example, it serves as an aid to memory. You remember, yes, that's what we talked about, and then you go through it and everything's fine. If you just show the pictures to someone who did not participate, it's not the same thing. So you have to walk those people through and tell them the story. That has a different effect. So a lot of people put those domain stories, for example, in the conference or in the wiki. And yes, it can serve to some extent as documentation with all the disadvantages that documentation has, like never being up to date and never being 100% correct. But it really lives from being told, I think.
Yeah, and actually, that's the main or that's the biggest win in that you need to tell the story in both cases. But in event storming, it's rather for at the end of the day, so develop that shared understanding within the room with those people. But same as in domain storytelling, but in addition to this one, so to domain storytelling, you also can basically gain that advantage that you can walk through another business person on that who wasn't there on the modeling session, but it's so pictographic and so expressive, so you can walk them through on that. Yeah, so we actually talking about the same thing. I just wanted to add that I'm also using both. And and another question, how would you model parallel flows in which there are no order of preference, or it is irrelevant? With comments using the domain story modeler, the step number could be the same.
That's also something we add in the next version. So if you're doing it on a whiteboard, then yes, you can just give them the same number. Or what also works is there's one element that I didn't use. We have this it's just another annotation, but it's a group, and you can say parallel and put all the steps in there that can happen in parallel. Or you can also use that to say, well, some steps are maybe optional. You start with a little bit more complex way, but some way of dealing with variation is also to something is optional. Here, actually, we could have used it to say investment bank, because you said the coordinators and the salespeople are from investment banks, right?
Yes, true.
Yeah, so we could, okay, I'll quickly do it. I'm not sure if everything belongs into that box, but maybe we could do something like
it's okay
that.
For the sake of example.
Yeah, and say, okay, all that stuff here happens in the investment bank, and all the other stuff happens in the outside world. That's also a way to use this group thing. So, and that's also some way that you can deal with this modeling tool with parallel steps. Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to ask something, but I forgot. Okay. Because we don't have, as far as I see, we don't have any more questions online.
Okay, so let me check my talking points. We talked a little bit about scope. This technique has become quite popular in the domain-driven design world, but it's not really a DDD thing, or not originally a DDD thing. So we coined this term domain storytelling in 2016 and tried to bring it into this community, because we thought, hey, there are people that could get it. But the predecessors of domain storytelling are more than 20 years old, so it has its roots in academic research in the University of Hamburg. So that's where it originates from, and I kind of dusted it off and gave it a new catchy name and started talking about it. So it's not really my invention. I just kind of found it a bit dormant, and now a couple of colleagues of mine and a growing community kind of watering this plant, and it's nice to see it growing. And it's really interesting to see what happens once an idea is out there and people start using it in all sorts of ways. So Nick Tune used it for modeling how bounded contexts work together, for example. That's funny. Someone in Istanbul used it for deriving Kanban boards from value networks. So it's really fun to see once an idea is out there, what happens with it.
Yeah, exactly. I think this was a very, very successful introduction of yours. I mean, the reintroduction of and naming of domain storytelling, because yeah, it became a very successful tool in domain-driven design, and also I guess in other areas. Then there is a question from Jane, like, is this a definitive set of icons? If it's a short list, can you just walk through them, or do you make up your own?
You can make up your own icons. So I guess this is a disadvantage of using the tool for the demo. Usually I start demoing something on the whiteboard and then I draw icons, even though I'm very bad at drawing. So the idea is
no, you are not. I already saw you drawing.
The idea is that you adapt the icons so that they fit to your domain. And for this modeler, we chose a couple of icons that are useful for typical office work, like email or phone call or folder or any sort of document. And this little icon here is just my fallback icon. That's how we started, but actually in the tool itself, you can now change icons and add icons. You can even upload custom icons, so the tool is now a bit more handy.
That's great.
Actually, I could show you an example that I prepared. That's from our book where we have leasing as a domain. So that's a leasing company, and you can see we have cars and a monthly installment. That's money and stuff like that. So don't overdo it. If you have 30, 40 icons in there, it doesn't matter if you have a tool or just on a whiteboard, it waters down your pictographic language. And also don't force it. Some things are not so easily representable as an icon. Just use text. It doesn't really matter that much. It's supposed to help you to express things. Sometimes the discussion, if something is a document or an email or some other representation that uncovers new domain knowledge that would have gone undiscovered otherwise. That can help, but it's not 100% strict rule and not a strict icon set. It's something to capture the story, and the story is the most important thing, and everything else is just there to help you.
I really like this one as well, with the risk icon.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a shame I cannot show you what I've already done in at the company I'm working at. So because all that are confidential information right now, but yeah.
It's the same for me. So we have to use artificial stuff. Well, this is based on a real company that Henning, you know him, has gained some experience, but of course it's very generalized and it could be any leasing company pretty much. Yeah, and the other reason I cannot show real examples is that most of them are in German, so only a small part of the audience would be able to actually read the story.
Yeah.
Okay. How about we share some links now?
That's a great idea. I'm just looking at the questions. I think we just have one more. Any best practices naming using actors to identify DDD elements, boundaries, subdomains, aggregates?
Yes, so I've prepared something.
Oh, cool.
So I've been kind of waiting for this question. But I'm not sure who asked it, so it's not someone that I have tasked to ask this question. So let's stick with this leasing big picture here. So let me walk you through it very quickly. So we have a customer who tells his wish for a car to a salesperson. So they speak to each other. So that's why there's this little speech bubble here. And the salesperson calculates the monthly installment. So that's the money you have to pay for the car, for this contract. And then the customer signs the contract, and the salesperson passes the contract on to a risk manager, who calculates the risk for this contract based on a lot of things, and he has to vote the contract. That's domain language. And then the risk manager informs the salesperson about the voting result. And since we're dealing with the happy case here, everything is fine. The person checks out, the risk is acceptable, and the salesperson hands out the car to the customer. So that's the basic story. And especially if you have like these coarse-grained stories here, you can neatly think about what activities belong together. So first you can ask yourself, are there any, what subdomains are there in this big domain? We want to narrow it down to subdomains. So for example, there's something that if I were to ask the salesperson which of these activities belong together and how would you group them and how would you name them, the salesperson or the salespeople would tell me, well, that's sales, that's what we do. So all this part is sales, and let's say all this other part here is risk management. So then we can dig deeper and apply our DDD knowledge and ask ourselves, well, if we want to build or redesign software systems, which part of these subdomains are actually modeled in software? And those become our bounded contexts. So we could have something like a bounded context contracting that's within the subdomain. We don't want to automate everything. So there's still some personal conversation and handing over the car and everything, but this part here, that should become a bounded context with things like contract and monthly installment as candidates for entities or aggregates. And we even have some activities there that could become commands, for example, like calculate or sign, even though this is coarse-grained. So if you want to go down on a technical level, I would model much more fine-grained, detailed stories. And just to complete the example, so in this risk management subdomain, we could have something like a voting context that involves calculating risks, and then based on the assessment of the risk, you vote the contract. So that's one way of reasoning about strategic DDD with the help of these domain stories.
Yeah, maybe I was wrong when I mentioned that I would rather use event storming for finding boundaries, right? It's also not it's just a preference, and that's all, because you can do that here as well, there as well. So really, it depends on, yeah.
Yeah, both work. So I've used
like
event storming a lot of times for finding boundaries. What I like to do is double check. So, for example, if you're done with event storming session and have your candidates for boundary events, pick a slice of the timeline, model it as a domain story, and see if it checks out. And the boundaries that you found in event storming, try to also draw them here and see if the collaboration between the people actually works, or if it would suffer, or if some sort of context mapping and translation would go on. So, yeah.
Yeah, true. Cool.
Okay, so I wanted to share some links, and I have to, I'm so bad at advertising stuff, but I need to advertise something. So I want to say, hey, there's a webpage, and it's called domainstorytelling.org. And it briefly summarizes the method and gives you some links and pointers, and I think even a video. And here you can see like how it looks hand-drawn and with sticky notes and everything. And the webpage mentions a book. Hey, we have a book. It's available on LeanPub. So Henning and I wrote that. It's still a work in progress. we're actually now hoping to release very soon another chapter on strategic domain-driven design with the help of domain storytelling. And we have teamed up with Domain-Driven Design Europe, and we're very happy to announce open domain storytelling workshop in Berlin very soon, March 5th and 6th. And the amazing Anneke of DDD Europe today sent me a discount link that I will share with you. I will put it now in the chat window if I can manage.
And also I'm going to copy it to the YouTube channel.
Yes. And yeah, so here it is. So it's a discount and it's only valid this week. So be quick and sign up and come to Berlin and enjoy 2 days of lots and lots and lots and lots of exercise. And we even have a slot where you can bring your own domain, and we or the group of participants will model your domains. That's also really fun. And I guess I can just also copy the other links. So I will add them too. So the website, the book, and the modeling tool on GitHub, I already showed that.
Yeah, I'm going to copy it to YouTube as well. Okay, we also have another question. Yes. But I think this is the hardest question, and I think I face this question all the time. So do you maybe have some handy arguments that can convince the domain experts that it's worth their time and effort to model the domain, especially if working system that has evolved over the years, becoming a big wall of mud already exists? Mm-hmm. I think everyone has this question. I think myself too. So like everyone really, because there are always people who you cannot convince easily because they cannot be convinced easily. Do you have a good practice for this?
Well, usually you have this kind of workshops when there is a pain that people feel, then it doesn't need much convincing. Then it's more a question of what method do we use, or where are we moving the discussion? Which direction are we going? What I would recommend is try to have something visual, useful as quickly as possible, and don't waste too much time with the setup or explaining techniques or anything, because the moments of revelation, they will help you and quickly convince people. So use these workshops as a way for people to talk about their problems, to make them visible, to make them heard, give them a voice. That's also really nice that in those domain stories, those actors, the people present usually identify with the actors that we model. So they can identify with them and really pour their hearts out if that is something that gets the conversation going. And very recently, I've had a group of people in a room together, and there was one programmer. She has been in the company for 30 years and actually heading the domain story. He proposed that idea, and after 30 minutes or so, we were done with the first one. And she said, after 30 years, I've never seen this part of the company or this aspect of the company represented in such a way. So that was really her aha moment, her eureka moment, and from then on, everything went really easily because we didn't have to convince anyone. They just saw, okay, it's useful.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, you did a very great presentation exactly about this, because you started by, I mean, we didn't go deep into explaining what this technique is at the beginning. Yeah. We really kicked off, I mean, you really kicked off with the main thing here, like, let's start, let's draw, let's capture the domain. And then you did explain it afterwards, when already people got a bit more familiar with that. So I think this is a great way of doing that.
Usually it helps to discuss the goal of the workshop before you start it, or even before you invite the people. Why should they take time out of their busy schedules to meet? Usually there's a good reason to do so. But then once that is out of the way, just get going and make some progress, and then I think people will see that it's useful for them. And
yeah. Okay. We don't have any more questions, I think, or at least I don't see it. Yeah. So do you have anything else to add, Stefan?
I probably should add something, but I cannot think of anything now. So I will just say thank you again for having me. Thanks everyone who joined, who asked questions, who is watching now on YouTube. And yeah, thanks Sophie for being the host of the evening and also the domain expert. Yeah,
thank you.
It was
I
really
think
fun.
Because
really
yeah, it was definitely. So I really enjoyed that, and really thank you very much. I still love this technique, I need to tell you. And yeah, that's it. So actually, thanks for all the participants as well. And yeah, so we are going to upload the recording and distribute that. And also congratulations on your workshop. So
yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks everyone. Yep, sorry,
yeah.
wanted to?
Yeah, I thought I could even provide the file for the model we made. So maybe I can upload it somewhere and
that would be great.
Add a link, and then people can, well, the picture definitely, but also the file itself and replay it in the modeler. So maybe that's something we can do.
Okay.
In the post-production.
Thank you very much. That's a great idea. So we are going to share this one too afterwards.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Cool. Then
thank you.
Thanks and have a good night.